says it's alive, but it's not. There's nothing there.
Welcome everyone to the next session of the Lagos State Economic Summit. For me, this is Andrew Nevin. I personally have been inspired by the last couple of days, particularly by the interview of the new DG of the WTO by His Excellency Governor Samuel Olu. So it's just terrific. We have a panel now, which sorry for looking at my notes. I've got so many notes here, but this panel for the next 75 minutes on funding growth sustainably. We've talked about a lot of important things at the summit. Obviously, if we don't get money in to be able to support it, we're not going to achieve any of that. So very critical subject for the next 75 minutes. I have such a high-powered panel here. I'm not sure how we're going to manage all of this together on that, but very quickly, let me introduce the panel and we'll get into it. So to begin with, we've got the Honorable Minister Babatunde Fashola, who of course is the Minister of Works and Housing, but also was the Governor, His Excellency, the Governor of Lagos when I arrived in Lagos. We've got Mrs. Bola Adeshola, who's one of the most famous bankers in Nigeria and Africa. She's now the Vice Chairman of Standard Chartered Sub-Saharan Africa, but previous, of course, was the CEO of Standard Chartered in Nigeria and a great inspiration to women leaders in financial services and elsewhere. We also have DG Ben Akabuezi, who is the DG in the Budget Office and the Federal Minister of Budget and Planning. And but of course, previous to that, he was the Commissioner for Finance, I believe, in Lagos, so has both state and national experience. We have Dr. Coyote Pitan. Everyone knows that he's the CEO of the Bank of Industry, a very critical finance institution in our country here. We've got Andrew Ali, who for many, many years was the CEO of Africa Finance Corporation, I believe a $5 billion balance sheet, is now one of the founders of a new investment bank in Africa, Southbridge. We've got Peter Sullivan, who's from Citibank and who leads their efforts with governments in sub-Saharan Africa. And last but not least, we've got Professor Doyen Salame, who needs no introduction on that. So just an incredible lineup on that. As I said, if I look at my notes, it's because it's hard to keep track of all this. I'm going to start with questions for each of the panelists. And let me start with the Honorable Minister Babatunde Fashola, who of course is the Minister of Works and Housing and former Governor of Lagos State. So here's my question, Honorable Minister. So you have the unique vantage point of having been both a very successful governor in Lagos State up until 2015 for 2 terms, and now serving at the federal level. So what advice do you have for Governor Samuel Olu as he seeks to build a sustainable state on a platform of critical 21st century infrastructure? This is your platform to give that advice.
Good afternoon, Andrew. Good afternoon to the very distinguished panelists on this panel, and felicitations to the government of Lagos State as well for this summit, a continuing tradition. My first advice really would be to just say that there must be an unflinching commitment to the enforcement of law and order. It's the most impactful foundation upon which to build all of the growth plans, infrastructure, and all of that. There must be a very, very clear and unambiguous commitment to enforce law and order. Yeah, you wouldn't have growth in an economy where those who break rules, those who extort money from legitimate entrepreneurs, those who drive against traffic, thrive. Investment will come into that kind of environment. So the pillar on which to build and to invest will be enforcement of law and order.
Wow, that's powerful advice, Honorable Minister, on that. So the starting point is not economics, it's actually law and order. If rule breakers are allowed to profit, then there's not going to be sustainable investment growth in Lagos. So let me turn to Mrs. Adeshola, Vice Chairman of Standard Chartered in Sub-Saharan Africa, and of course, as I said, CEO of Standard Chartered in Nigeria for a long period of time. So, Bola, I mean, it's been very tough for all of us economically with the pandemic causing all sorts of problems. You're from the financial industry. What funding sources do you think the government and the private sector should be seeking to build Lagos coming out of this pandemic to fund growth sustainably? Mrs. Adeshola, Bola, can you hear us?
Okay, sorry. No, the host had to unmute me, so sorry about that.
Oh, you don't have to apologize. We all understand the new normal. So go ahead, please.
No problem. And good afternoon once again to all the panelists. And I think if we look at this within a developing economy context, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that any investment in expanding the productive capacity of a society is essentially a form of sustainable finance. And these days we've reached a point where we can actually distinguish between different forms of finance, including how specific projects are funded as governed by what is now termed ESG, environmental, social, and governance priorities. And Lagos State being the sort of economic heartbeat of Nigeria and Africa, it's critical that we look at all forms of available financing that are aligned to ESG. So I will touch on 4 or 5 emerging sustainable finance structures, and then one last point on thematic and specific sustainable finance products. So the first, I believe that is available is blended finance, and blended finance really is a structuring approach where you have public and private sector investors with different objectives, but investing alongside one another. And basically, it's to substantially mitigate for poor risk-reward ratios that private sector investors look at, and then concessional capital and guarantees then come from government. And this is something which is widely used across the world. But there are certain elements that are also required to deliver blended finance products. And one of the key barriers really or challenges that many countries face is governance concerns, and I think that applies to us in Nigeria as well, being part of the emerging markets, and we need to be able to address that. Blended finance also, and this is something which Standard Chartered has worked on significantly over the years. In fact, we've done about $5 billion worth of blended finance transactions, most of them in infrastructure and with social impact. And you find the likes of the World Bank and the IFC, who can mobilize capital, are looking for allocation where they can sit side by side with private sector. So a key and often utilized source of sustainable funding is also achieved through PPPs, and this is one of the avenues that Lagos State has availed itself of many a time. And of course, once PPPs are supported by partial guarantees and substantially de-risked, it brings additional capital also for sustainable infrastructure, and they can help to accelerate investments in social welfare, healthcare, water, and so on, along the themes agenda of Lagos State. Worth mentioning in sustainable funding sources is also domestic infrastructure and project bonds. And of course, Lagos State has several advantages in this area. I think there's a compelling investment opportunity that the state can leverage on. It has over the past 10 years raised bonds, and I dare say achieved several unprecedented milestones for subnational issuance in Nigeria. So given the excellent track record and strong investor confidence, the domestic bond market remains an avenue for Lagos State to explore. And there's obviously strong naira liquidity, particularly by pension funds seeking such investments. to further diversify the funding options, the government could also look at specific infrastructure bonds, setting up an SPV and looking at standalone commercially viable projects that and bonds repaid from cash generated from those projects. And again, fixed offtake. Once you have a fixed offtake, it's easy and it significantly de-risks, the lending structures. This is a structure that's used much in Latin America. A link to bond issuance is securitization, and I think this is an open, sphere for Lagos State to consider in sustainable financing. And I'll just give an example. In Ghana, in 2017, Standard Chartered issued a bond for the Ghanaian government under the Energy Sector Levy Act. So this was backed by future flows from levies on petroleum products. It was heavily subscribed and is being used significantly to manage and resolve challenges in that sector. Similarly, Kenya has done it. Future road levies, they've securitized, and we've worked with the Kenya Roads Board to be able to structure that. So I believe that Lagos State should look at specific securitization. The governor ruled out the 2030 plan yesterday, and I think there's several projects that would fall under that. The second to the last one I will mention is ECA financing. Again, this is an avenue, if you're looking at whether it's buses, rolling stock for rail, whether you're looking at water infrastructure and boats. The thing about ECA is that it helps to mitigate both political and commercial risk for the local lenders in particular, and it improves the appetite for infrastructure financing. Some that we have worked on: railway project in Tanzania, healthcare in Angola, airport in Uganda. And these are, this focus on sustainable social infrastructure. And then finally, as I said, along sustainable finance products and the themes in the core ESG space are loans and bonds. So under loans, we could also look at green loans, sustainability linked loans, which are linked to ESG performance, and then transition loans, for example, which focus on current energy transition. And under bonds, there are very many thematic bonds. So whether it's gender bonds, sustainability bonds, social bonds, green bonds, and so on, that Lagos State can look at. So I think in rebuilding the critical infrastructure, besides donor funds and contributions, there's several options for sustainable funding that Lagos State, I think, is very well positioned to access along the journey to the 2030 aspirations of the state.
So, Bolo, if I had to summarize here, I mean, there's so many different options. The issue is Lagos wrapping its head around how to do this, but also all financing in the 2020s is sustainable financing. There's no such thing anymore as non-sustainable financing.
Absolutely.
It's a question, because it's not worth financing if it's not sustainable. So thank you for that. We'll come back to you on that. So I would like to say, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and I will try to get to them on the course, depending on the time as we go through this. As I said, we have 75 minutes, but certainly I think that what Mrs. Adeshola has given is a very comprehensive view of the forms of sustainable finance. If anyone has a question, put it in the chat box. I'll try to get to it. I wanted to ask, to turn next to DG Akabueza, who of course was the Commissioner of Budget for Lagos and is now in the federal government as DG in the Minister of Finance's office, DG for Budget, again playing both the state role and the federal role. So Ben, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Andrew.
Oh, Ben, you're so clear. Good. Thank you for that. So here's the question for you that we have here. So, Lagos, like everyone else, is grappling with the economic downturn, oil price, pandemic. So what recommendations do you have for the Budget and Planning Commissioner in Lagos, given all the experience you've had on both the federal and the Lagos level?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to join this very distinguished panel and to be participating in the Ehingbe, which brings back fond memories. But the first thing I want to say to the Commissioner is I feel for him, and I really do, and especially given that the challenges for Lagos were compounded by the recent post-NSAS, riots that basically, just disorganized their budget. So, but in terms of specific recommendations that I will have for him, the first thing will be to take a hard look at the expenditures. This is a time to reprioritize expenditures in line with current realities. I mean, that's the starting point and the easier bit to do. The fact is not all sectors are equally impacted by the pandemic. And so some sectors that where activity is quite, I mean, the health sector, for instance, I mean, hasn't been this active for a while. You will need to put more money into those sectors, and it's not a time. It's unfortunately given that the private sector and individuals are also adversely impacted by the downturn. It's the prospects of growing revenues in the immediate term are limited, and so you've got to try and stretch the resources that you have. You need to try and optimize them. The second thing will be, and that might sound counterintuitive, but I would say counter-cyclical. Despite the constraints, despite the challenges, this is a time to provide for palliatives and or incentives for the most vulnerable individuals or sectors in this pandemic. There are, if I take the case of Lagos, for instance, I mean, the entertainment sector was one of the key drivers in that economy. The events, the events and event management sector. Private education was big also. These are some of the sectors that have been hard hit. The government needs to find a way of keeping those sectors afloat so that you do not permanently dampen the entrepreneurial spirit that had driven those sectors to make important contributions for Lagos in the past. This is also a time to take a hard look at your asset portfolio and determine what you could let go. I mean, certainly any non-core assets that you can find buyers for at this point in time to be able to generate, resources to fund public investment, will be worth considering. It's also a time to borrow. Yes, I mean, oftentimes borrowing sounds like a dirty word in Nigeria, when, especially in the public sector, but this is a time to borrow within, available, fiscally sustainable limits for the state. But it's a time to borrow and keep things going. It's a time to be, from the standpoint of the public finance, management in the state, you've got to be counter-cyclical at a time like this. You've got to keep growth going.
Thank you, DG Akabuez. I mean, it's just powerful listening to you. I mean, I think the message that you're giving is, look, you've got to prioritize when you're in a challenging financial situation, whether you're an individual or the state of Lagos. You've got to choose your priorities. And I think everyone really appreciates some sectors have really come under pressure through no fault of their own in the pandemic. And it's a tragedy to see those sectors disappear, the businessmen disappear, the entrepreneurs. I think this issue about the assets is very interesting. As you know, PwC has been putting out the idea of turning dead assets into live assets for some time. And of course, the CBN came out, I think this week, and announced finally there was the deal for the National Arts Center, which is just a fantastic step forward on that. So thank you for all that. And we'll come back to, let me turn now to Dr. Pitan, CEO of Bank of Industry. Dr. Pitan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So Coyote, it is always a great pleasure to see you. It's just, it's very impressive what you've been doing at the Bank of Industry. And of course, you're a client of ours, and we really, really appreciate all of that. So the question for you, though, is interesting. Of course, we all understand that all of Nigeria needs sustainable and inclusive development. And Bank of Industry is not just in Lagos, it's in all of Nigeria. And of course, there are great needs all over the country. So the question for you to kick off here is, how do you balance, I mean, we still know that Lagos is almost 30% of the GDP by traditional GDP numbers. How does the Bank of Industry think about this, and how it balances off the fact that Lagos is still such a big commercial industrial center versus its other demands around the country? And so what investment can Lagos expect from the Bank of Industry given the constraints you operate under?
Thank you very much, Andrew. And good afternoon to everybody, especially to the Honorable Minister and the co-panelists. BOI really understands the role Lagos State plays in the economy of Nigeria. Like you said, about 60% of the industrial activities, takes place in Lagos. So what are we doing as a bank to support Lagos? Lagos is a major area of focus for Bank of Industry. For instance, in the year 2020 alone, we disbursed 80 billion naira in Lagos to 10,631 enterprises. Lagos State actually is about 55% of our portfolio in Bank of Industry. Not because that is the way the bank wants to do it, but because that is the reality on the ground. The companies are there, the demand is there, and we are there to meet those demands. Over the 3-year period, 2018 to 2020, we disbursed 342 billion in Lagos State alone to 17,000 micro, small, medium, and large enterprises across various sectors, agro and food processing, creative industry, engineering and technology, healthcare and petrochemicals, oil and gas, renewable energy, soil minerals. So Lagos is key, to what we do. We have 2 offices in Lagos now. The head office in Marina and the branch office we have in Ikeja. But because of the demand from companies in Lagos, now we are about to conclude having another office in Lekki just to cater for the needs of people in Lagos. So, and that is at advanced stages. It's likely before the middle of the year, the Lekki office for BOI will open. When you look at the pandemic, everybody, is trying to see what they can do. As a bank that is socially responsible, we budgeted about 1 billion naira to help in that effort. About 500 million of that was given to the federal government, COVID, but Lagos was singled out, and we actually donated 100 million naira to Lagos State to help to fight COVID. In terms of partnership and advocacy for Lagos State, we are currently talking to Lagos State on how to partner with on a 10 billion, what we call a matching fund arrangement, whereby half of the money comes from the bank and the other half comes from Lagos State. 2020, even though it was a difficult year, was also a good year for Bank of Industry. In 2020, we were able to raise about $2 billion, over $2 billion. So we have money available for lending, which means for businesses that are thinking of expanding in Lagos, who are looking for funding, BOI is ready to support that. Not only that, in the next 1 year, inside March last year, we have reduced the interest that we charge our customers. And so you're able to actually attract funding from BOI now for the next 1 year at 5%. And we're able to give funding for up to 7 to 8 years at 8%. So for the companies, we're open for business. But for Lagos State in particular, because we're talking of, they need major monies for infrastructure. They're working on the light rail, and I've actually had discussion with the governor. There are many areas we can collaborate, even though the government at the federal level is talking of the infraco, that takes some time. There are some that Bank of Industry can actually fund. It can be well packaged. I was listening to Mr. Adeshola talked about some of these funds that you can securitize, for instance. Some of these light rail kind of things, it can be packaged to be funded by a bank like Bank of Industry. And we are willing and able to do it. So if there are small to medium-term projects, $200 million, $300 million, it can be financed locally, And if Lagos is interested, we will be willing to fund them. Thank you.
No, thank you, MD P10. I mean, I think what you said is very critical here in a few dimensions. I mean, one dimension is just, we know we need investment from outside of Nigeria to given the investment needs. But Bank of Industry has actually already got that funding from outside Nigeria. So people can come talk to you, but it's also a testament of Bank of Industry's ability to have all of the things that Vice Chairman Adeshola was talking about in terms of governance and structuring, that people outside of Nigeria are willing to give you the money that you can then invest in projects in Lagos. But I'm also hearing you, Lagos shouldn't worry that the needs around the rest of the country are so, they are great, but there still will always be capital for Lagos projects as well. We can't ignore Lagos. Let me move on now. I want to talk to Andrew Ali at this point. As I mentioned before, of course, he's very well known as the CEO of Africa Finance Corp, which I think, as I said, has a $5 billion balance sheet. And now he's founded something that's very exciting, which is an investment bank and advisory service serving all of Africa, Southbridge. Andrew, can you hear me? Andrew, are you there?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. The host had to do it.
No apologies in these days, but it's good to see you, Andrew, and congratulations on your new venture. So I wanted to ask you, I mean, when you were at AFC, of course, you worked all over Africa. So you've seen these challenges in many, many different contexts on that. So what are sort of the examples or case studies or things that you invested in or have seen in terms of infrastructure development around Africa that you think would really be pertinent lessons for Lagos State at this time?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be on this panel and in this conference. Let me say that. I think I'll try and be brief, but I think that before I answer, I want to set a little bit of context. And I would say two things. I mean, one is that the global economy is changing. It's becoming a lot more digital. We're discovering new industries. I mean, even the COVID pandemic has shown us the importance of, biotech and the medical industry. So I think that that's one thing. The other thing I think is one of the problems that we face, and, to some extent, we could see both sides of that coin with the NSARS protests, which have been mentioned, is that, we have a burgeoning young population who are looking, to be engaged and to have jobs and to really contribute and put something into the economy. And, but on the other hand, if they're not engaged, we see what kind of happens in terms of what happened at the end of that episode versus what was happening, I think, with some of the more engaged ones beginning. So the point I'm making is really that as we sort of think about how to develop Lagos, and as we're thinking about how to bring in investment sort of follows investment opportunities, of course. And I think there's a big opportunity around technology in all its different forms. And we've already seen that Nigeria has become a major magnet for tech investment. I know that Doyin, I don't want to steal any of his thunder, but I know one of the things that Doyin talks about a lot is about the need to bring in investment into the country. And that's why I'm actually not going to choose an African thing for us to look at, but I'm going to mention Bangalore. Bangalore is actually a second-tier city in India. It's not, Mumbai, it's not Delhi, it's not even Chennai, yet they've been able to develop a huge, IT industry, and some of the biggest IT companies globally actually, have come out of Bangalore. And they did this quite deliberately in terms of developing their IT infrastructure, in terms of, becoming a hub, because, with these industries, when people gather, more people want to come there. And, these are things that I think that Lagos can and should be doing, because you can only, and, I think we've talked a lot about funding projects on the debt side, but, you need to get equity investment, you need to get FDI, you need to get long-term investment. And, Lagos is a big market, is a big place, has a lot of very smart people. And so thinking about, developing IT hubs, developing medical research hubs. I mean, I'm, flabbergasted that despite all the tropical diseases we have, we don't have any vaccine production capacity in Nigeria, for example. We've got, sadly, a lot of people with diseases that we can test on, and I'm not talking about COVID here, I'm talking about Lassa fever and things like that. So why can't we start to develop these technology hubs and start to look more at, renewable energy is another thing, and that is also part of, not the whole, but part of the solution to our energy problems. So I think we should start to think about, how we can be more attractive to some of these 21st century industries, which are really, I think, booming, and I think could even boom a lot more. So that's why I would select Bangalore. I would also select some cities in Vietnam, like Saigon, to look at, because again, they've really been able to develop from, being relatively backward, and I don't mean that in a bad sense, but, to becoming technological cities. The last city I think we should look at, which isn't so much around tech, but it's around developing certain industries, is Dhaka in Bangladesh. Bangladesh itself has come from being a basket case to being one of the better developed economy, or faster developing economies in South Asia. And, they've done this largely by developing hubs around the textile industry and other light manufacturing. So those are three examples that I would like to give. And I think, underpinning that is that we really need to think about what are the industries that will attract investment in the future, rather than always looking back to the past and, how other people developed in a different epoch. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's very interesting. I mean, I was in Bangalore the first time in 1998, and they have become wealthy by exporting non-tangible goods, non-physical goods. And, I've, of course, been standing up and talking about the fact it's quite difficult for us to export physical goods given some of the constraints. Why don't we, what you're saying is, that's exactly right. Let's focus instead on exporting knowledge, exporting Nigerian brains. They don't have to be in the diaspora to make money for Nigeria. So I think that's an important thing, and to change the narrative. We all have this idea in our head of the way Korea developed, the way Taiwan developed, the way China developed through light manufacturing, and that may not be the development path for Nigeria. So I think a lot to think about on that. Let me turn to Peter. So Peter runs the Sub-Saharan Africa government business for, that sounds a bit strange, but government business for Citibank. He's been in the region for a long time, more than 15 years. He actually spent some early years in Mali, so knows West Africa very, very well. So Peter, just you've listened to some of this, and of course we've all been looking at the impact of COVID-19, and we need funding in Lagos. You're really connected to kind of where the capital is in the world. A lot of this capital, which is earning a negative return and not currently flowing to Lagos or Nigeria. So what would you say about what it's going to take to get the right kind of capital flowing to the right kind of projects in Lagos based on where you sit?
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everybody. And I'd like to compliment Bola for doing a great job of laying out so many of the financing options that are available to Lagos State. I think with that, I would like to just do maybe a deeper dive into the sustainability bond market, because I think, this offers a tremendous opportunity to tap into this pool of private sector capital. Currently, it's about 1.3 trillion outstandings, with 550 billion being issued in 2020 alone. We're seeing growth to be, very high double digits growth. So even in the first month of this year, we've seen $48 billion of bond issuance, which is a 48% increase on last year. So that the growth potential is truly amazing. Another important trend that we're seeing, and obviously this has been driven quite a bit by COVID, is that historically it was initiated through green bonds and the focus on environment. But if we look at the breakdown for 2020, where the total outstanding in the market is 62% green, last year it only represented 45% of the bonds that were issued, while social and sustainability bonds made up 53% of total issuance in 2020 compared to an historic rate of 35%. So
all right, John Peter, just explain the difference between those two, between the green bonds and the sustainability bonds for everyone.
So when we think about sustainability bond, and Bola alluded to this, you know, there's a number of bonds now that are related to very specific SDGs or specifically to environment. So green bonds tend to be really focused on renewables, energy, you know, very environmentally focused. You look at social bonds, these are ones where you see the investments, the use of proceeds going into projects that will deliver social impact. The sustainability, the difference there is sustainability tends to embrace the overall SDG universe. So where you may have social, which may be more healthcare related, or so sustainability could address a number of SDGs at one time. You also have a small bit of transition bonds is where you have financing really being deployed for mature industries moving from sort of brownfield into more green field areas. So you're beginning to see a little bit of fragmentation here, but in a way you're also seeing a greater consolidation really around SDG focus, and we believe. And we're also seeing sustainability linked bonds, which is another important trend. And you can think about that as pay as you perform. So basically the structure of the bonds, even the coupons of the bond can be related to the issuer hitting very specific KPIs, specific targets, which may result in either a lower coupon or potentially a higher penalized coupon. So again, you're seeing that this market is demanding greater accountability and greater transparency by issuers. And that's really the difference between sort of the sustainability bond market and the Euro bond market, where use of proceeds tend to be general intent, where these have to be very specific. There were, again, target outcomes. These really are very targeted outcomes and people need to be accounted for, and they actually have to disclose and report to it. And I think this is an advantage for African issuers and issuers like Lagos. You know, and Andrew talked about digitalization and deploying that technology. You know, data is the new oil to be monetized. So if you're out there as an issuer competing for this capital and you have the data that basically can track, measure, monitor, and disclose the impact of investors' proceeds going into certain projects, you know, that's going to attract the capital. That's going to bring that money in. So I think, you know, what Lagos needs to do and how to really access these markets, one is to, you know, establish a sustainability bond framework, which really just allows you to address the four major principles around the sustainability bond market, which is use of proceeds, management of proceeds, project evaluation and selection, and also reporting and external review. So that framework allows you to, you know, begin to think about what are your priorities, what are your investment opportunities, what are the sectors that need to be driven, what are the expected outcomes or targeted benefits that we can derive from that. You then wrapped up around the narrative of what is Lagos State, you know, what is the potential, what is the credit? And this becomes an incredibly powerful story for Lagos to say, these are the specific opportunities, but this is the environment in which you're going to be putting that investment money to work. So if Lagos begins to sort of put that framework to place, they can access directly private sector capital. But I think what also is more important, and Bola talked about this in the blended finance, is how do you leverage public sector capital? And you can utilize that same framework, you know, by discussing and working with the DFIs, with the NGOs, who are looking to put that capital to work too. So it becomes a real enabling framework for you to really think through about where is that capital, how can I attract that capital, and how can I get that capital mobilized, you know, for the benefits of Lagos.
So Peter, thank you for that. So I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask you for 3 specific ideas for Lagos, 3 specific areas where they should be working on putting that into practice to tap into these sources of financing. So let me come to Professor Salami. Of course, he needs absolutely no introduction, so I won't even introduce him. Doyen, fantastic to have you here. I'm not sure we even need a question for you. You know what the conference is about, sustainable finance. You've listened to 6 very distinguished thought leaders in this area. Just, what are your thoughts about this issue of getting sustainable finance in the right place and working in the right way for Lagos?
Right. Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon to everybody. As I think about this, there are quite a number of thoughts that run through my mind. Not least is the thoughts around data, because when I saw the invitation, it speaks about how does Lagos recover from a recession and end SARS and build back better. And the first thing for me always is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so it's unfortunate that one is unable to say these are the sectors that were adversely affected. This is the scale of the impact that these events have had, and therefore to be able to come up with a list of priorities, because it is when you know what are the key drivers of the economy in Lagos that you're then able to say, based on objective data. I remember one of the documents that was sent to me ahead of this session. One says Lagos is 25% of Nigeria's GDP. And a few pages down the same deck of slides, it says Lagos is 5% of Nigeria's GDP. Now, both 25 and 5, neither of them is, shall we say, empirically verified. So that's the first thing for me, that there is need for clarity about the numbers. So what has been affected, the scale and the nature of the impact that COVID and NSAS has had on Lagos. The second thing, and it's really more to echo a point that Ben Akabweze, DG Ben Akabweze has made. In my view, this time gives Lagos a chance to review its expenditure and revenue profiles. No matter how you look at it, when you put Lagos in the context of Nigeria, then Lagos looks to be a shining star. However, when you start taking the numbers apart, and I've had to do that, you quickly discover that both expenditure and revenues in Lagos are actually diminishing. And this is just looking at growth rates in absolute terms. When you start allowing for inflation or start allowing for the size of the population, and again, this goes to the heart of data. The Population Commission says Lagos is 14 million. Doubtless nobody in the government of Lagos State is going to agree with that. Andrew, I'm sure you recall our various conversations about Nigeria's population numbers. So for me, this is the time when it's time to review and say what exactly should be the role of the government, into what should it put its money, and into what should it incentivize private capital or private participation. You see, that there is no point us belaboring the point, the issue about the lack of resources. The key question now is, where else can resources be incentivized from to achieve the objectives? It's now no longer about who achieves it. It is how do we achieve the key objectives that we really are trying to drive. Beyond that, it's also important to take this opportunity to try and resolve some of these long-standing, seemingly intractable challenges that bedevil the Lagos environment and the Lagos economy. My mind goes, for example, to the challenges around transport. And one key challenge around transport, which we all see on a daily basis, is the access to the Apapa ports and the spillover that has on the rest of the Lagos economy. My mind, and I hope I am right, but I'm sure if I'm not, I will be corrected. But the challenges of access and the issues around trucks and the rest, I seem to remember go as far back as Governor Tinubu when he was governor of Lagos State, because I seem to remember the Orile trailer park was built, if I remember, by him as part of a set of solutions designed to alleviate this problem. But over time, the problems have actually worsened, and therefore essentially leading Lagos, at least some parts of Lagos, already into a logjam. I was looking at the numbers the other day. From Apapa Port to Surulere, which is just a couple of kilometers, I'd be surprised if you got 15 kilometers there. The cost of moving a container from Apapa to Surulere, I'm told now is about 1.3 million naira. And when you look at the cost of shipping exactly the same container from Europe, then you're looking and wondering, how on earth did we allow things to get to be to be this bad? And going further beyond that, especially when we say, okay, NSAS and COVID, the point's already been made, and I'm not going to belabor it, that the health sector still needs to be supported in order to play the role that it must play. But the security sector, I think, also needs to be significantly supported. It's no longer helpful for citizens not to be able to go about their regular business without being afraid. And I'm not talking about, the kind of commotion that attended the end of the NSAS protest, but the regular security situation, in my view, in Lagos is not quite what it needs to be. And so, even though we say the governor is the chief security officer, but we know that given the federal arrangement, but I think somehow Lagos has to find a way of engaging with the federal authorities so that security in the state can actually be beefed up. Living in fear, I don't think kind of helps anybody. And the final point that I would like to drive, when you look and we talk about building Lagos back, building its productive capacity back, we shouldn't forget a couple of things. One, Lagos has lost out to neighboring states in terms of the industrial base. Sometimes I see figures that say Lagos is 60% of Nigeria's manufacturing capacity, and I can only smile that what they may mean is 60% of the headquarters of companies in manufacturing may be in Lagos, but the real manufacturing are actually outside of Lagos. And yet, Lagos with 4.5% poverty is a magnet for inter-regional migration. And so we really do need to do something about re-establishing the competitiveness of Lagos, potentially as an industrial hub again. I've been making the case that Nigeria needs to re-establish industrial, hubs, not necessarily all industrial. Some will be agricultural, some will be technology, some will be industry. It's a whole host of things, but Lagos needs to make up its mind. What is it wanting to be known for that will enable it meet the growing population that it is seeing and which it is likely to see for yet some time to come? So these would be some of the points that I would put on the table for consideration in trying to build back Lagos in the aftermath of COVID and NSAS.
Okay, thank you, Doyen. Thank you, Professor Salami, for that. So let me, if we get time, I'm going to come back to this data point because I think it's very critical. But it's very interesting. You ended on security, and the Honorable Minister started on security as the #1 issue to get the economy going. I want to come back to the Honorable Minister and ask, I think, a very interesting question here. So when you were governor, and there was the time when I arrived, moved to Lagos, we had record levels of growth. And by that, I mean in classic GDP terms. But per capita income, because population was increasing, lagged behind. Other social indicators lagged behind. So just when you look at the impact of having the high GDP growth, but not necessarily the social indicators improving. And now you look at the situation in Lagos, we've had subpar headline GDP growth for a long time, but hopefully we'll get back to higher GDP growth. But how do you think the governor and the next governors should do things differently to make sure that higher GDP growth also translates into better SDG outcomes so everyone benefits, not just the people at the top of the pyramid? Honorable Minister.
Okay, things continue to remain very fluid and dynamic, even though the challenges essentially remain almost the same. How to improve the quality of human life and the human experience. But whether it is investments in technology, whether it is industrialization, whatever it is, whatever the undertaking is, I think the point has been made. And I do not subscribe to limiting the understanding to security alone. No, it is something much more broader. And that's why I chose the theme law and order. Yeah. Lagos has a very, very diverse and rich human capital, some of the best on the continent, because it's an immigrant capital, largely. But that capital will not give off its best, whether in terms of productivity, whether in terms of investment, if it feels unsafe, if it feels threatened, if it feels hampered by the activity of those who make it difficult for them to thrive. And this must be the biggest infrastructure, if you like, that Lagos must build. Is law, order, infrastructure, and capacity. That all those who are willing to do legitimate business can do so without any let or hindrance. And it's a question of occupying those ungoverned spaces. So Dr. Salami spoke about Apapa. If you understudy Apapa properly, you will see that the biggest contributing factor there is not the poor condition of the road or indeed anything. People have just moved into an inefficient area and are making life difficult for those who want to do legitimate business. So they must be removed. So all of these costs that you are talking about don't come to government pockets. They go to illegal pockets, unions and all sorts of. So government must step in and say, no, you can't prosper on the back of people doing legitimate business while undertaking an illegal activity. That's why I chose to start where I started. Oh. So government must reoccupy those spaces. Government must continue to engage with all of the investors. Take the complaints, go and fix them, and come back for more. It will never end. And a lot of people, so some of the things that need to be done, the Lagos residents registration exercise must continue so that we want to know who are all the residents. So those are part of the law enforcement infrastructure. Traffic enforcement must be strengthened. Street lighting, police patrol, everything is a whole gamut. The legal system must also be a culture to prompt dispensation of justice for those offenders so that people just understand that this is a city where we must prosper and we can only prosper on the side of the law. So those who then choose to live outside the law, we must make it difficult for them. And that is the way to harness all of the growth and the opportunities that Lagos can really unleash. In terms of what to do differently, really and truly, all of it will depend on the foresight of the governor and the government. What do they see in 10 years' time? In that 2030 plan, what do they see? So it's less looking behind and a lot more foresight looking forward. But Understood. Everything must be on the legal framework of the state.
So, Honorable Minister, before I let you go, because I don't know, we're going to run out of time in this session, but I just need to ask you on this law and order point, what's the role of new technologies, data? Do they play a role in being able to establish Lagos with the right level of law and order?
Oh, yes, they do. I mean, I know that the state government is rolling out its fiber optic and connectivity program, and they must be commended for that. You see all of the infrastructure being rolled out in every part of the state, and they deserve the highest commendation for doing that. All states also should do that. Street lighting, data collection, identity management, everything, registration, house numbering, property identification, and all of the investments that have been made before must be upgraded and consolidated and digitalized, if you like, if they have not been so digitalized. Harmony with all of the license plates records, property records, and everything, so that the portals to to integrate and identify people. And as I think somebody was saying something about the disparity in the data being churned out even in the papers, how many people are in Lagos. So identity management also is very, very helpful to identify how many people demand service, what kind of service do they demand, and where are they asking for the service, and where should government put its resources, depending on needs.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And I have registered for my Lagos identity. I hope everyone on this session will, if they haven't already, will do that. So let me go to Bola at the moment. So we have some questions in the chat. I think that you could address. So two questions together. Quick answer. We've got about 18 minutes left on the clock here. So Bola, the two questions about getting projects going. One question is just how do we get more long-term capital into Lagos? In there. I mean, people are often willing to put up short-term capital, but what's going to convince them to put up long-term capital? And related to that question is, there often seem to be projects that have the potential to be really valuable, bankable, but there's a lack of money to prepare, and the sponsors behind it don't have the capital to do all the preparatory work. So those two issues, what are your thoughts on that? Do we have to unmute Bola?
Yes. Thank you very much, Andrew. I didn't quite get the second question, but first question on accessing long-term capital. I think my earlier responses, or my earlier response rather, the various options there, give options for long-term capital raising. Of course, I mean, the international capital markets is there. And we've seen in 2021 that there's been some significant shift in investor sentiments there. There are risks, but we believe that there are also mitigants to the risk. What we found in several other African countries, and of course, I mean, Lagos being a significant city within Africa, is where we anchor investment raise on DFIs, assets that could be disposed of, in which case the funds can then be used for infrastructure projects. But any or all of the products that myself and Peter mentioned can be structured into.
But let me just put it very starkly. How attractive is Lagos as a long-term investment destination versus other markets, given issues around reputation and other issues that we know? I just say, are there things Lagos should be doing to make itself more attractive to the long-term investor?
Well, one of the points is what Governor Fashola raised, which is law and order and security. The second is trying to restructure its finances. I know that I think last year or so, Lagos bought back some of its bonds to be able to lower the cost of its borrowing. Transparency and accountability in terms of its the financials for Lagos, and I think Lagos has been known for that for quite a while. Also looking at areas that investors are seeking to invest in. And I think we've spoken extensively about sustainability, securitization and so on, presenting itself as having the cash flows and the streams that can actually service these loans. So a lot of it is positioning from a governance perspective, which I believe that the current administration is looking at way from the time of Governor Fashola, because ESG and the governance, the G there, I think is very critical to be able to attract sustainable long-term funding.
So you think you're bullish that Lagos can do it? They can do those things in terms of attracting the long-term fund governance, transparency. So. That's a good message to hear. And this, okay. So let me just, again, I'm sorry, the eye on the clock. Hopefully, we'll have a minute for last thoughts from everyone. I want to go to Ben, DG Ben at the moment. And a question that we had for you, which you sort of already answered, but maybe not the way we thought, was Ben. Can you hear me? DG Akabueza, can someone unmute him if he's muted?
Okay, I've been unmuted now.
Okay, so the question I have for you, which you sort of answered, but let's go a little bit deeper into it, is, when you were the Lagos State in the Lagos State government, you had IGR increased every year. Of course, it's been challenging with pandemic. So do you have some recommendations for the team today to expand the IGR, or is your recommendation, like you said a little bit earlier, maybe not to focus on trying to increase it in such difficult economic circumstances? How would you approach the IGR issue in the kind of economic pandemic turned out?
No, well, I didn't say not to try to expand the IGR. Of course, you've got to do that even in these times. But the point is, it's not a time for new taxes.
Okay.
But there certainly is room to improve tax administration to try and I know that we kept pushing the limits in terms of getting everybody into the tax net. But I know that at the time that I left the Lagos administration, by our estimates, there were anything from 3 to 3.5 million people still not in the tax net who could be there contributing no matter how little. So these will be, so that even in this situation, you can continue to, but in terms of expanding IGR at this time, one thing that it will take, and not just at this time, but at all times, is focus. I don't know if this still happens, but in the 8 years of Minister Fashola's term as governor, we used to have a monthly forum called the Monthly Revenue Stakeholders Meeting, which he presided over himself personally. And we held this meeting without fail. And everybody who had a part to play was gathered into the room. And he didn't want to come back month after month giving reasons why you were not delivering on your targets. The other thing that must be driven is measurement. And I think Dwayne touched on that. And that's where the Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget and his team must, roll up their sleeves. You've got to set realistic, but then challenging targets. And those targets have to be driven. Performance has to be measured and actively, reported, on. But it's certainly hard work. Expanding IGR will be hard work. It will take consistent effort, and that's what I think they need to just keep at.
Okay, and how would you tie the law and order point to the IGR point? Are they connected in some way?
Oh, absolutely. When people feel good about their environment, then, they're more favorably disposed to paying, taxes. When they feel harassed and feel like, they're responsible for personal security, and if they just feel generally dissatisfied about the environment, they spend longer time than they need to in traffic just because some people are not behaving well. Just those things, when people just feel, rubbed off the wrong way, they are not very cooperative. So you need to win the battle of the hearts and minds. It's critical to drive up, IGR, make the people feel good about their city, about their city, and they just develop a pride for it. Then, they say, look, you know what, I'm happy to pay a little more.
Absolutely. I think, and of course, my colleague Taiwo always talks about tax morale and how critical that is. And it has been getting better and better in Lagos, and pride of the city. I mean, I hope I live long enough to see Lagos be the world's greatest city, because I'm absolutely convinced that's going to be true. Let me turn now to Coyote. I just wanted to follow up. So if you listen, Andrew Ali made the point. I think Dorian made the same point. Lagos has to decide, it's big enough to have more than one sector, which sectors it's going to focus on. I don't think anyone I've ever talked to, though, thinks that Lagos is not going to focus on technology. So I'm wondering, what are the specific things that BOI is targeting in technology? How is it getting money to, this is for MD Coyote, how is the BOI getting money into the technology sector in Lagos? Coyote, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you very much. For us at BOI, the tech sector, it's an important sector, and we even see it be more important as we go into the future. In terms of what we have done in that sector, in 2020, we disbursed about 30 billion in that area. But we've gone beyond that. We are backing a $75 million tech fund just to support businesses in the early growth areas. for which the bank itself, BOI, is putting down $18.75 million. We've gone very far. We're in the process now of appointing managers to manage the $75 million fund just to help our people in technology. Then as a bank, we have now decided that our CSR, we focused on the IT. And the idea is to have tech hubs in every state of the Federation. And that has started, and Lagos was our pilot. You know, interestingly, we've set up a hub in Ajah, you know, to see how it will work. The hub in Ajah is doing very well. In fact, now we are doubling the size of the hub in Ajah, the innovation center that we put up. That's between BOI and Betibra. But we funded it 100%. Nationwide, there are about 7 tech hubs that we have invested in. You know, we have the University of Lagos Civic Innovation Hub, which will open anytime from now. They're about finishing. We have also the BOI Unilag Incubation Center. That also we funded. We are finishing now 2 hubs in Kebbi and in Kaduna. And we already have Kano and I think Onitsha as the next areas we're going to go. So for us, at BOI, we've seen the future of IT, and we are saying, look, let's put our money there. And that's our CSR. Put a hub in every state. You know, it is going to encourage what the youth are doing. It's going to encourage employment. At the same time, we are putting funding behind it to ensure that the good guys that we have who are, you know, very good in IT, they can actually create products, you know, apps that can actually become winners, you know. So it's a very important area for us at BOI.
Wow, fantastic. That is very heartening to hear, and heartening that the Innovation Hub in Ajah is doing so well. I mean, I'd also like to see it not just spawn companies, but also spawn employment. People who can work for overseas companies while remaining, they're technologically literate, can remain in Nigeria. So that's fantastic. Thank you for that. So let me turn to Andrew and Andrew and Peter, and I'm going to ask you basically the same question, starting with Andrew. Do you have 3 game-changing projects that you think the Lagos government, together with the private sector, should be pursuing? Top 3. Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I think that well, I mentioned one is really how can Lagos become a hub for IT and innovation, and, you know, start to develop 21st century industries. I think Kayode has, you know, I mean, it's glad to hear what Bank of Industry is doing, but I think that the whole aspect of sort of essentially selling our services offshore using technology as a form of export, it's already happening, but how can we organize this and make Lagos a hub for doing that? And how can we digitize, you know, the selling of perhaps non-digital services? Like, you know, we've got all these graduates from, you know, accounting, law, etc., who struggle to find jobs. Can we sort of digitize them and sell their services offshore? So I think that's one point. I think the other point is around, again, this is something that's just come out of the pandemic, but, you know, again, it really surprises me that Nigeria is not doing as much in terms of medical innovation as, you know, we really ought to. Given the disease loads we have in this country, I mean, you know, the lack of productivity from malaria, I mean, if we had some of the statistics that Doyin was talking about, I'm sure that would be, you know, very scary. So, I mean, again, how can we, you know, we've just got this new hospital that's been built in Lekki, but, you know, that's a hospital. How can we sort of leverage that to bring in some more medical research, and not just in Luth and Lasuth and the traditional ways of doing things, but, you know, we saw how those guys developed the mRNA technology, you know, a couple in Germany, you know, why can't a couple in Nigeria? And my final one, and this is one that people have heard forever, And, you know, I think will be a recurring decimal in Lagos, unfortunately, given the population growth, is, you know, just around the transportation and also power, which is more of a federal government thing than a Lagos state thing. You know, that those are just, you know, the sort of light rail projects. We should try and find a way to complete them, and just to make it easier for Lagosians to get around. So that's one that I think you will say in every conference, and no matter what government does, it will continue to, you know, because the population and pressure continues, it will continue to be an issue, but I think it's worth repeating.
Okay, fantastic. Peter, so top 3 big ideas for Lagos to pursue.
Well, I'll focus on one, but I would say that, you know, of the 17 SDGs, we believe that 9 all have
Doyen, can you hear me? Can we unmute Professor Salami?
Right. Thank you. 2 things certainly come to mind for me. The first is actually the capacity within the government of Lagos to really manage the state called Lagos, especially as it grows. A lot of what we have said makes the assumption that there is internal planning and execution capacity within the government of Lagos. I'm not saying that there isn't, but I am saying that it is imperative that the government ensures that that capacity exists and that it continues to grow as the challenges that the government of Lagos continues to face. Now, the other key point that I would like to put on the table are 2. First is around town planning, because I think the efficiency of Lagos as a metropolitan area is greatly undermined by what seems to be a lack of coherent town planning. And I think that's a capacity that, again, you know, is important to have within the government. And the final point for me is the support for MSMEs. I was looking at the Smedan report the other day, and 93% thereabout of enterprises in Lagos belong into that category. And the key question is going to be, what exactly can or is the government able to do consistently and in a sustained manner that enhances the participation of this group in the economy in Lagos? So those would be the sort of 3 things that I would say. The capacity, the planning capacity of the Lagos State government overall, the town planning capacity of the Lagos State government, and its ability to support the MSME sector, I think would be 3 areas that should receive some attention.
Thank you, Professor Salami, for that. So this has been a fantastic session. It brings to a close that. I'd like to thank all our incredible panelists. I've never been part of a panel like this. We've had the Honorable Minister Babatunde Fashola, Minister of Housing and Works, or Works and Housing, former Governor of Lagos. We've had Mrs. Bola Adeshola, who's Vice Chairman of Standard Chartered Africa. We've had DG Akabueza, who was DG right now in the Budget Office of the Federal Minister of Finance, but of course was the Commissioner for Finance and Budget in Lagos before. Dr. Coyote Pitan, who's the very well-known CEO of Bank of Industry, doing amazing things. Andrew Ali, who's a former CEO of the Africa Finance Corp and now founder of Southbridge Investment Bank. We've got Peter Sullivan, the head of the SSA Citibank, Global Citibank's government practice there. There's deep experience in this. And of course, we've had Professor Doyen Salami, who needs no introduction on that side. With that, we bring this to an end. I want to thank you all for being part of it. I've enjoyed the discussion, and it really makes me confident for the Lagos of the future. Everyone, be safe today.